The following is a presentation of 13ABC Action News. Now, your table is ready. Join 13ABC's Jeff Smith with the decision makers of Northwest Ohio and Southeast Michigan. This is the Roundtable.
Obviously, somebody wanted to do damage to me, and I think, given the fact that we now know that the bomb was remote detonated, they would have known. I believe they would have known the boys were in the car. So when they pushed the button, they had to know that the boys were going to be injured as well. I got to believe that they knew what my routine was. At that point, we had been into football for probably about 2 months. So this routine is something that we did every day, every time that we had practice, and and that's the really I guess disgusting part, that outside of targeting me, that somebody would still engage in this type of an act when the kids are in the car.
13ABC able to get an exclusive interview earlier this week with Eric Chappell, a local attorney who was involved in a car bombing in Monroe 1 year ago this week. And I wanted to bring on to the roundtable with me today 13ABC Action News reporter and weekend anchor Christina Williams. You got this interview this week, and it was one of those things that kind of, do you think the anniversary had something to do with his availability?
Oh, absolutely. He actually said after contacting me and reaching out that the ATF had essentially told the family that they should reach out to the media, because we're at the point where we're now past that 1 year anniversary, and essentially the ATF had some leads initially. Those tips were coming in. They basically said their informant stopped talking, and at this point they're at a standstill, and there's still no break in the case.
Bringing people up to speed on the story, if you recall, a father and his 2 sons heading to football practice about 5:30 in the evening 1 year ago in September. They go the typical route as Chappell was talking about, and all of a sudden, boom. But you know what? That's a misnomer, because he said they didn't really hear anything.
Right. At the time, everything seemed to be all a blur, and he said that they were driving down that normal route. It was later discovered that the ATF said that essentially, yes, this was a homemade IED, if you will, and someone had to have been standing nearby and remote detonated that bomb. So, they didn't hear anything at the time. It was simply they saw fire, and he kind of just moved into quick action from there.
We're going to hear from him a number of times. From a reporter's perspective, going into this scenario for our viewers to know, they have decided that they're going to open up and they're going to start talking to us. You go into that interview not knowing what exactly is going to be said. Are you surprised? I watched the interview. He was pretty candid as far as his comments were concerned. Were you surprised by that, and not so much guarded as one would expect in an ongoing investigation?
Well, I think the interesting part is that they were silent for so long. He is also an attorney in the area, so I think by nature he's going to be somewhat guarded. He also has not only the 2 boys that were in the car with him, but he has 4 children and a wife. And he has never been in a situation like this. So for him to open up, yes, I think that was very interesting. It was something that we hadn't heard before, so we almost had to go back a year. I don't want to say that those wounds are healed, because that's far from true. Right. But I think at this point,
especially with nobody arrested.
Sure. Their entire family, though, has had a year to deal with this, a year to process it, a year to work through it. So I think this was a time where they felt comfortable reliving some of those moments.
There's a $20,000 reward out there for any information leading to an arrest in this case. One of the things you brought up to them was the change. Talk about how you talked to them about how they have really had to change their lives.
Well, I mean, essentially, he was targeted. Someone wanted to do some major damage, and as Chappell mentioned, not only to him, but to his children as well.
Go ahead.
That was planned out at the time. So I think that they have had to make some changes. He said that at his office for work at this point, that is under lock. They've changed the way that they deal with clients, essentially. There's more security, especially in their home, too. They live in a community where he said, it's the type thing they don't even think twice about leaving the door unlocked at night or the windows open. Now that has changed. They have much more security, and it's something that they're constantly thinking about, unfortunately.
Yeah. Here's what Eric had to say when you asked him that question. Take a listen.
We've tried hard to maintain some sense of normalcy. The message that I've tried to deliver to the boys and my family is, that we're going to do our best to make sure that this doesn't change who we are and how we live our lives. But we've obviously made adjustments. We've taken precautions at our house, and we take precautions relative to how we live our lives and what we do. We're obviously much more security conscious now than we have ever been.
So a real change in lifestyle, and obviously you said he had his 2 boys sitting there with him. We saw a little bit of them in the video when we were running it just a second ago, but you said there were things that were said, but there were things that probably weren't said as well, because this is still a very sensitive situation. You got that feeling?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, not only were his sons Cole and Grant, who were in the car with him in the room when we were doing the interview, but his 2 daughters were there as well as his wife. So, you know, the family dynamic is strong, and as he mentioned, they're trying to remain, you know, some sort of normalcy, if you will, but it's, yeah, I don't think he was maybe as candid as he would have been had it just been him, because let's be honest, there has to be some anger there. There has to be some real angst that's still in that family.
Talk a little bit about this, one thing I left out, but talk a little bit about how he tried to keep the kids from knowing what had happened.
Well, absolutely. At first, as soon as this happened, both the boys had some pretty serious injuries. Cole was actually in a cast for weeks. His son also had some injuries from the blast. So when they were in the hospital for those 10+ days, they tried to shield them from any sort of media coverage. The boys apparently were actually watching ESPN. I still don't know the backstory behind that. And this story popped up, I'm assuming because of the football practice link. And at the time, his younger son Cole said, "Dad, there was a car bombing in Monroe. I wonder who was in that car."
And then he finally had to basically spill the beans?
Essentially, because at the time, his son didn't realize that they were in that car.
There was a lot of speculation early on, and we're here with 13 ABC's Christina Williams talking about the Eric Chappell interview from this past week, an exclusive here for 13 ABC. And there was a lot of speculation as to what did this. Was it a car malfunction? For weeks and weeks and weeks, and the ATF got involved and were staying very tight-lipped. I think we used that phrase again and again and again. But Eric came to the realization of what he thought it was while he was trying to tend to his kids.
Almost instantly. He actually told me that he was wearing a Bluetooth, was on the phone with a client as they were finishing that drive to football practice. He said when they initially didn't hear anything, but there was the explosion, if you will, which they later determined, he walked around the back side of the vehicle, and it was at that point that he knew something was wrong.
Take a listen to this.
You could see like a starburst pattern in the pavement where the shrapnel kind of, you know, exploded around the different areas. And it was at that moment that I think my mind was kind of questioning, I was probably a little stupefied by the idea that it was an explosion, that it was a bomb. But I remember thinking back to some pictures of some of the, from Iraq and Afghanistan, some of the roadside bombs and the patterns that the bombs would make on the pavement. It reminded me of that. And so I had the idea in my mind that that's what happened.
That was one of the things that grabbed your attention, that specific statement that he made right there, and being able to recognize that.
Well, it's not something that we've ever heard of. In fact, the family has an ATF investigator that is specifically assigned to their case. And, when they were in the hospital, Eric told me that she initially said, "I've never had someone like this. I've never had a case like this." Roundabout, what she was getting to is she's never had a case where the victims have lived.
No kidding.
No.
Is that one of the points of uneasiness for this family? And obviously the ATF, and we had interviews with them as well this week, but knowing that the intent was to do physical harm, if not kill, and there has been no one arrested, and obviously there is that overhanging cloud of looking behind you or checking behind you continually. Are they living that day to day? He talked about normalcy, but it's pretty hard to reach that.
I think that they're really trying. I think that you almost have to for your children. I can't even imagine being in a situation like that. I'm sure that he's on edge all the time. He actually had a moment there of lightheartedness in the interview and said, "Now let's get one thing straight. I think I was accused of being a helicopter dad way before this happened, with 4 kids, 2 of them being women." But I think that at this point, they're really trying to keep that together, and I think it's for their children. I mean, I'm sure that anyone else would do the same.
The other thing he keeps doing is he keeps holding out hope that somebody's going to talk. And he says there's been a lot of that has come forward already, but did you get the sense that there is still hope there? That
I think that there is. You know, in talking with some of those ATF investigators in the past, as we mentioned, there were tips, there were leads going in a certain direction, but they need that person. The way the ATF works is they want to make sure that every single duck is in a row so that when they break a case, that case is going to stick. Yeah. They don't want to do anything halfway. So, you know, Eric actually brought up a statistic, being an attorney, saying that when he talked to that ATF investigator, they said 99% of their cases are solved. Might take some time for that statistic to be so great. They're not going to take any risks here. They're going to make sure that everything is solid beforehand.
You wanted to pose a question to him to open up and to tell people if they have any information, why they need to come forward. Here's what he had to say.
Is that if you know something, come forward, make a call. I think that there have been a lot of people who have reached out to provide leads and information to the authorities, but you know, I'm sure that there are quite a many people out there that are that know something that they haven't said, you know, quite yet. And you know, I would remind them that, you know, this wasn't just something that involved an adult or myself. You know, that this was something that encompassed some pretty hard injuries to children. And you know, I'd encourage them to make a call to the authorities and supply whatever information they have, even if they feel like it's minimal information. It could be something that's very important. And if anyone has any doubts about doing that, you know, just try to put themselves in our shoes for a second.
Did you get the feeling that this investigation, living through this investigation, is a day-to-day thing, a week-to-week, a month-to-month?
I think it is a day-to-day thing. I think that for the kids, they're trying to make it a month-to-month. You know, they made it through the summer. Both the boys have recovered from their injuries. They're both back to playing football this year. They're making those steps. I think from a parental standpoint, that's what I would be worried about, because clearly whoever was responsible for this crime, as he mentioned, had no qualms about going after not only him but his children as well.
Christina Williams, we appreciate you taking some time with us here on the Roundtable, and of course our big thanks to Eric Chappell for granting us the opportunity to get that story out there. Obviously important to them to have that story told even further here, the one-year anniversary of that car bomb going off in Monroe. We appreciate your work, and stay right there. When we come back, we will sit down with political writer for the Toledo Blade, Tom Troy, to talk a little bit about your vote 2012. Stay with us.